Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Ask Mike with our senior analyst, Mike Irwin, answering your questions that have been submitted on hogville.net. And our first question this week comes from Blood Red Hog, who says, whoa, what happened at the end of the game 3 between DVH and Tony Vitello? That conversation looked pretty heated, and I would agree with Blood Red Hog right there.
You know, the only thing we can say for sure is what those two guys said to the media after the game. There's going to be speculation about this, but let's quote both of them here. I'm quoting, first of all, this is Van Horn. First off, Tony is a really good guy and a really good coach. You know, it could have been something that was going on during the game, could have been something about recruiting, could have been about a lot of things. Probably pick one or all three, so that tells me it's probably all three. And that is between me and Tony, okay? Now here's Vitello's version. You know, he had some things to say, thought we did a good job and it was an excellent series and all that. Probably poor timing on my choice, but brought up some off-the-field stuff that is really not a big issue. That is probably more than I should say about it. That's kind of what transpired. So it sounds like to me that all of this stuff that went on last week before the you're a good guy, I'm a good guy, we like each other, slap each other on the back, maybe that was a little over the top. What I would say in general about situations like this is that, and this is throughout athletics, you can have brothers that compete against each other. You can have father and son that compete. You can have best friends that compete. Yeah. It's not unusual for people that are real close to each other in competition to get really mad at each other.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I would say overall, that's my view of that. I think it was surprising to a lot of people only because all we ever heard going into that game is, yeah, we like each other.
Love him, he's great.
We're cool.
Yeah.
And it's obviously that's not the case. So.
But at the same time, don't think they hate each other by any means.
But there are probably some issues there, and they're trying to do the same thing. They're competing in the same situation, and in this case, going head to head, each trying to win an overall SEC title.
There's a lot on the line in that series.
So it just shows you in athletics, you can be buds with somebody. But what I would like, and you have this happen sometimes, and part of this is our fault in the media, because we ask these questions, oh, what does Tony Vitello mean to you? What's he going to say? He doesn't mean much to me. He's a jerk. But you could question this stuff a little differently and try to bring out through questions the fact that, you still want to get each other, right? Do you ever have any issues? And you might could create a little bit more accurate presentation going into this thing if instead of trying to make these guys talk about how wonderful they think each other is, they kind of tell the truth. Well, so maybe that's partially the media's fault. I'm
sure next time those two face each other, we will definitely be asking those questions.
Definitely no one will be shocked the second time.
All right, Mousetown asks, is there bad blood between Dave Van Horn and his former assistant Tony Vitello that no one was aware of? Which kind of goes into what we were just talking about.
You know, I've kind of looked into this and talked to a couple of sources that are in a position to know both, and they kind of each said a little bit different version of the same story, and it kind of goes into what Van Horn said when he mentioned 3 things and said it could be all 3 of those things. So I'm kind of crafting all this together and coming up with sort of what I got out of talking to everybody about it. And that is, first of all, these two guys, these two schools have some common recruits. Players that each is recruiting. And maybe Tony Vitello, in recruiting some of these guys, pointed out some things about Dave Van Horn. Well, he's older, he's more set in his ways, he's not a cool players coach like I am. And, you know, you can't necessarily go to him and talk to him about anything you want, whereas I'm cool, you can just come in and say anything you want. And so then this gets back to Dave Van Horn, that he's saying this stuff, and Van Horn doesn't say anything, but he's getting a little steamed. You know, why are you doing this? And so that's on his mind, and then this game gets played. He goes out to talk to Vitello after the game is over, and Vitello says something to the effect of, well, congratulations beating us with players that I recruited. Might have been referring to Kevin Copps, because Vitello probably had more to do with Copps coming to Arkansas than anybody. So he's kind of giving a little dig there. You know, you beat us with guys I recruited. Good luck trying to do that in the future, because I'm not going to be recruiting for you in the future. Then Dave Van Horn, who's had enough of this, starts bringing out all this other stuff, and then they get into a big argument. Why are you telling people this?
Right.
Can you not just recruit straight up on your own? You have to badmouth me to recruit, whatever. And so then they all get together at the end and make these statements, and sort of what they said kind of goes into all of this. So I sort of feel like this is accurate, but here's the problem. You're never going to know for sure until they each tell the real side of the story. I don't think Van Horn, knowing him the way I do, that he's ever going to do that. But Vitello might.
He might.
With his own media.
Down the line.
Because he's more of a guy that would just sit there and, you know, a certain reporter that he likes is in an office with him a month from now when the season's over. What went on back there? Oh, well, you know, this, that.
Yeah.
So we may get Vitello's version. I don't think Van Horn will ever tell us if what I just said was accurate.
And I'm not saying
it's accurate. It just came from a couple of different sources that I know the both of them, and they were enough. What they said was enough alike, and sort of blended in with what those two guys said after the game that it sounds reasonable.
I agree. Loy Loaf Daniel asks, what did you think of DVH's decision to use Wiggins as the 9th inning closer against Tennessee on Saturday? I know a lot of people had some hot takes on that.
Yeah, there were fans that questioned that. Here's the only thing that I questioned, and look, you get to the point where some people act like you can't question anything anybody does. Dave Van Horn gets paid to make these decisions. I'm well aware of it. He gets paid $1 million a year for making correct decisions. I don't. Nobody else does. But that doesn't stop fans or those of us in the media from asking certain questions. My question after the game was not necessarily Kevin Kopp's, but understanding that he had thrown 53 pitches or whatever the day before, and you probably want to rest him a day. But it had more to do with what your options were available other than Wiggins.
Yeah.
And here's the thing with Wiggins. And this was mysterious, and it never got answered. He was sort of pitching in most SEC series until up to the last A&M game, Game 3, and that was the game Arkansas lost. They lost by 1 run. Wiggins actually came in and pitched well in that game. He pitched the 8th and the 9th and didn't give up a single hit, so he did his job. Arkansas was down 11-10 when he came in, and that's the way it ended. So they lost that game, but it didn't have anything to do with Wiggins. But all of a sudden, he doesn't pitch in the next 3 SEC series, and there are no midweek games, so he goes almost a month without pitching. Then Dave Van Horn announces he's going to start against Arkansas State, and I'm thinking, okay, they're going to let him go a while and see what he can do now that he's back pitching. And I don't know if he was hurt, what happened. There was no explanation. So he goes 2 innings and gives up 1 hit, I think, in 2 innings. And I guess Dave Van Horn felt like, okay, I've seen enough.
That's a good showing, yeah.
And he said afterward that once that happened, he had penciled him in as the closer in that game, Game 2. That he was going to do it if it was necessary. And that's his decision. Now, it didn't work out. Here's what I would say about that. All the rest of us, me, you, anybody, any fan, we know what happened after the fact. We know that it wasn't a good idea to put Wiggins in there because he didn't get anybody out. He gave up, a base hit, a walk, and a 3-run homer, and lost the game in about 10 minutes or less. So, yes, it looks like a dumb decision after the fact.
Hindsight's 20/20.
But nobody knows that going in.
Exactly.
So Dave Van Horn has to do that, and the bottom line is it didn't really matter because it didn't hurt them because they still came back and won Game 3 and was able to use Kevin Kopp's. The only other thing I would say about this is, and I wrote a story on the internet about this, and some people misinterpreted that. Van Horn said when he was talking about this, and this is after the Saturday game, he said, well, I'll have to talk to Kevin about how he feels, and he's talking about him pitching at the end of the Sunday game, but it probably will be very little. Now, I was aware of the fact that he could be just kind of saying that for Vitello's benefit or whatever. But it just sounded like when you consider how much this guy's pitched this year, how many times he's pitched twice in a weekend, and how many pitches he's thrown, including last weekend when he threw 111 pitches, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe his arm is starting to get a little tired.
I would think so.
So maybe we'll see him dial back a little bit. And that was the purpose of the little grabber headline that I wrote, is he wearing down? Not wearing down to the point where he can't pitch, but maybe he's not going to be available for 6 innings every weekend.
Exactly.
You know, I just wanted to pose that possibility because Van Horn had said it. Well, now what do we know to now? We know he put him in for 3 1/3 innings.
Yep.
So that's not a little to me.
No.
So I think Dave Van Horn was just kind of throwing that out there and wasn't true. Or maybe he went to Cops and Cops said, hey, I'm feel fine. I'll go. Yeah. You put me in now.
He probably could have.
The real story here is Kevin freaking Cops. How does he keep doing this?
It's absolutely incredible.
I mean, he comes in the game, the bases are loaded, and nobody's out, and he gives up that 1 run on an infield sacrifice, and then he shuts him down after that. I thought what he did was absolutely incredible in that inning.
Yep.
Saved the game right there, and then, of course, Arkansas, you know, ends up with the lead later, and he just keeps going, and all of a sudden he's got a 2-run lead, and you're sitting there biting your nails because you don't know what's going to happen. He did give up the 1 run, and he gives up some base hits, but he's doing things that you're not used to seeing guys doing just over and over and over and over again.
I think he surprised pretty much all of us this year. I mean, he was good before his surgery and stuff too, but not to this extent.
I don't think I've ever seen a guy that's impacted an entire season more than he has, because keep in mind, he's not winning a game each week.
Yep.
He sometimes, even if he doesn't get credit for the win, maybe it's just a save. Without him, you might lose 2 games instead of winning 2 games, and then what does that mean? You got swept.
Yep.
Can you imagine Arkansas without Kevin Cops this season? It's just, I don't know of a player that's had that kind of an impact.
He's 9-0, 7 saves.
That's like
wild.
What?
So
that's 16 games.
He's altered 16 games for Arkansas.
It's incredible. For the better,
by the way.
Whoa.
Just crazy. Okay, next question is from Said76, who says, I've been reliving the 1998 football season watching clips on YouTube. In the Mississippi State game, it appears the Bulldogs' game-winning field goal was no good. It cost Arkansas a rematch against Tennessee in the SEC title game. Was the kick good, or am I imagining things? Did you go back and watch this?
I did, but I'd seen it before, too. And here's the problem. You're looking at it from behind the goalpost, and the kick is high. So it goes up and it starts angling toward this right upright.
Yeah.
Now, if it's one of those balls that goes right over the top of it, it's real easy to tell what happens.
Right.
But this thing goes way up high, and it's starting to spin off in this direction. So you're thinking, okay, at what point did it cross over the top of that upright, and then it would have made it a missed field goal? And you can't really tell. You'd have to be right under it like the referees are.
Right.
So I'm going to have to assume they knew what they saw, or the one over on the right side looked up and saw. But if you really look at it, it looks like to me that it's good. I can't swear to it, but that was my impression before, and I went back and looked at it again, and I still think it was good.
It was called good anyway, so. All right. Lighthorse Harry says, I watched the Razorbacks on SEC Network and ESPN+. I've witnessed an extremely large number of SEC PR commercials, which brings the question, what the heck is wrong with the PR people in the SEC? With the 30-second SEC commercials, you might presume Arkansas is in a different conference.
You know, I'm glad that somebody finally noticed that besides me, because I notice it all the time, and he's exactly right. Whenever they run these little promos, you see this one little dinky clip.
Just one.
Maybe it's, maybe it's Devo Davis.
Yeah.
A half second of him hanging on the rim or something in that shot, and then it's on to all this other stuff. And it's been going on. Even now, you got this #1. Arkansas has been #1 in baseball longer than any team I could ever remember. And it's like, yeah, we'll do a little bit on this. You see a little bit of it. I think it has to do with the fact that Arkansas is the smallest TV market in the SEC. If you do it state by state, if you rank the size of the TV market in that state, Arkansas is probably the smallest. The problem with that kind of thinking, and I think that's what's going on there, is that you've got a bunch of SEC states like Alabama, where you've got 2 teams, Auburn and Alabama. You've got Mississippi and Mississippi State and Mississippi. You've got Florida and Florida State and Florida. So you got a bunch of these states that have at least 2 D1 teams in the state that divide that audience.
I agree.
And then you've got teams like you've got states like Georgia, where you've got a pro football team. or a pro basketball team or a pro baseball team locally. And that will pull off viewers away from your product. So when you add all that stuff up together, to me, Arkansas doesn't come across as the smallest in the market, because in this state, it's fairly unified. It's like you got viewers all over the state. You're not dividing it with a big chunk of people over here or big chunk of people over there. So I think it's short-sighted on their part, but I don't think it's going to change, because I know how these so-called executives work, and I just think that's what they think.
Do you think it has anything to do with some of those teams just doing better than Arkansas's teams have in the past several years?
You could say that if Arkansas was struggling. Like maybe you could say it in football.
Right.
Especially for the past several years. But when you have the #1 baseball team, I'm just telling you.
I agree.
They have gotten less publicity. Watch that rally cap thing every week on the SEC Network. You know what they do? They sit around and talk about all the teams that are second place, third place, who's going to get in, who might not get into the tournament, and all this. And Arkansas gets mentioned, but not like you would think normally for a team that's absolutely dominating. And again, I think all of this is a conscious decision on the part of people there, knowing how many people in our audience are from Arkansas, how many are from Alabama, how many are from Georgia, how many care about this team, that team. And I think that factors into what they do.
I agree. All right, Rob's 4516 says, it's easy to look at the variables surrounding the football team and think that they should be improved from Coach Pittman's first season. But how do you see the rest of the conference teams on our schedule stacking up improvement-wise?
You know, I don't cover those other teams, so I'm not an expert on what they're going to be next year. But I would say generally, when you start talking about the SEC West, teams generally don't get worse.
They get better.
There's been a lot of talk that Alabama lost so much talent this year that they're going to be down. We hear that every year.
Every time.
Because what does he do? Nick Saban just keeps reloading with all these recruits, and he's got an excellent coaching staff, and they just coach these guys up. So he's got the best players and the best coaches, and they keep winning. So I don't know that Alabama's going to be down. LSU was down a little bit this year because they lost their great quarterback.
Right. And they lost a ton of talent.
They lost a ton of talent. I think they'll be back up some this year. I don't think it'll be where they were 2 years ago. But they'll be more competitive than they were. And Arkansas has to go play them at Baton Rouge now, right? So that's going to be a tougher game, although they lost it last year. You look at Ole Miss. Arkansas beat Ole Miss. Will Ole Miss be better in year under Lane Kiffin? Well, he's a good recruiter, so probably. They'll probably get better. I would say the same thing about Mike Leach. He's just a good coach. He will sit there and figure out his talent. He's got more time now in the offseason to figure out what do I do to make this team better. And so they'll be better. Will A&M be better? Everybody says they will be, but they lost their Kellen Mond, their great quarterback, who's been had a lot to do with their success lately. So maybe they drop off a little bit. But here's the bottom line. Yeah, Arkansas is probably going to be a little bit better too, but what do you do when you're trying to get better and improve and go past other people who are also getting better?
Right.
Somebody, and I've forgotten who, made this statement a few years ago, and it's a brilliant statement. He said, trying to build yourself out of a problem in the SEC, and he was talking about football. He said it's like trying to have a mechanic work and tune your engine up while you're driving 70 miles an hour on the highway. If you can just stop the car and let the guy sit there and work on it, he can get it fixed pretty good. But if you're having to keep going at the same time that you're doing it, it's harder. So the bottom line is I expect Arkansas to be better. I think there may be a drop-off a little bit at quarterback anyway, and maybe some at wide receiver, although I'm not sure about that. But I think at every other position they'll be stronger, certainly deeper on the D-line, at linebacker, secondary places like that, offensive line. So if you're better in all of those areas and you drop off a little bit overall, you should be better. But the problem is almost everybody else they play is going to be better.
Exactly. By the way,
it's tough.
I got a question. Did you see the Lane Kiffin stuff, the red carpet that he rolled out for his players in the spring game and everything?
Yes,
they all dressed up and had it was dangerously close to club dub situation.
Yeah, it looked pretty weird. and then the whole way that the spring game was done by the SEC Network was just nuts. I mean, what's that guy's name that's on their baseball team, the backup quarterback? His name escapes me.
I know who you're talking about. Can't think of it right now.
What's his name, Jason?
Plumlee, right?
John Reese Plumlee.
That's right.
So he's a baseball player and he plays some. I don't think he's like front line, but he does hit from time to time. So he's been over at a baseball game and he comes back and now he's standing on the sidelines. So I'm trying to watch the spring game. I'm interested. Is Ole Miss going to be better? You know, I want to see what their starting quarterback looks like because he's pretty good anyway. And so I'm watching that. And then we get this ridiculous, never-ending interview with John Reeves Plumlee where he's talking about crazy things like before the game he tried to strike out Lane Kiffin or Kiffin tried to strike him out or whatever, and ha, 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 is this not funny? And I'm going, does anybody ever tune in these things to actually watch what's going on, or do you have to create jokes and crazy things?
You know, spring games get dull sometimes.
They don't get dull for me if I'm trying.
Like later on, after your main starters are out.
Well, maybe late, but this was going on the whole time. I mean, he was having their starting quarterback was having a good game while this interview was going on, and they weren't even talking about it. He's throwing touchdown passes, and I'm going.
That's different. That should be on.
and so my point is, I think if you're an Ole Miss fan, you're tuning in there to see who looks good. Maybe there's certain players you want to see. I know I've been watching this wide receiver. I want to see if he does whatever. And you can't do that because they're making a joke out of this whole thing. It's turned into a giant feature. I didn't like it. I stopped watching it after a while because I didn't feel like I was getting anything out of it.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, I guess, till the season if they actually
And maybe some of that
improved.
was Kiffin. Maybe he stepped in and said, I'd like to do this way or that way. I don't know how much influence he had on the way that was televised.
All right, Pat Johnson says, last week you said the new image likeness rule allowing athletes to get paid will actually curb cheating in recruiting, while some are saying it will make it worse. Can you explain that again? I'm confused.
Okay, just last week, the University of Arkansas announced this new program called Flagship. And it's basically a division within the athletic department and they've already hired somebody to run it, and I'm sure they're going to hire more people. The first thing they're going to do is take their student athletes, and I think Arkansas is ahead of the curve on this. They're going to have them go over to the Walton School of Business, and those people are going to teach them how to negotiate with businesses to do a contract. You want my services? I want to do this for you. How do we work this out? But the university can't technically just do all of this for them, but they can train them so they can do it themselves. And apparently it's going to be legal for this entity, this Flagship, to bring in the businesses and say, okay, here's what we're trying to do. Here's these guys over here that have been trained to do this. Now, it's okay if you talk to them. You know, we can't make you talk to them, but if you want to, if you own a tire store and you're a Razorback booster, and there's a player you like and you want to help him out, and he can help you out, then they will hook you up. You just go up there to this division of the athletic department, and the guy say, yeah, we'll get you together with this guy. You can have a meeting, and he knows what to do. And then you can work out some sort of situation, maybe a contract or whatever, and they can make money off of this. Here's where I think it's going to I don't think it will stop cheating, but I think it will reduce it. Because what you're doing, in effect, is buying players. Now, you're doing it after they land on campus, not before. And some of the questions we've had before, one guy in particular said that he thought these boosters would start cheating and start offering these deals before they got on campus. Well, there's nothing to stop them from doing it. But if I'm a head coach, and I know this is going on, and I think a lot of them do, I contact Booster Joe Blow and I go, hey, it doesn't work that way anymore.
Cut it out.
You don't have to do that because you're putting us at risk when all you have to do is just wait till we get the guy on campus, and then you can do what you want. And what will help us recruit is the reputation of our ability to put athletes with businesses. This is where I think Arkansas is going to have an edge because look at all the major companies they can line them up with. So I think they're ahead of the curve on this. I think they're doing something legal that used to be illegal, which is paying players. Do I like the idea that you're no longer going to have student or amateur athletes? Yeah, I don't like it.
I don't either.
Because before you could say they're amateur athletes. They are not anymore because they're getting money for who they are and their image and likeness. There's no going back from this. It's not going to change. So how did we get here? This is what I want to say. It's the NCAA. The NCAA is behind almost all of the problems in college athletics because they aren't doing what they originally were organized to do. They are supposed to work for the member institutions. They're supposed to bring in people on the rules committee. These are not their own people. These are people that come in from the colleges. They make the rules. They vote them in. We're going to enforce them, but we've got an enforcement committee where they've got a committee on infractions, and they're made up of people from member institutions.
Yeah.
So we're just sort of facilitating all this. The one thing the NCAA is supposed to do is manage the playoffs in every sport but football. They don't manage football because there's really not a typical playoff system. It's been cobbled together. But they're allowing them, the NCAA, to get involved in things that I don't think they were ever meant to get involved in. And one of the things they did 10, 12, 15 years ago was they started selling, they started getting money from video game manufacturers to do an image and a likeness of players on a certain team. So if you bought NCAA football 2003 and you're an Arkansas fan, you could dial up Arkansas as a team, and guess who would be there? Some 6'5" quarterback with blonde hair that looked amazingly like Matt Jones. Matt Jones didn't get any money from this.
Nope.
The NCAA did.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was there were some athletes at UCLA, I think they were basketball players, and they went, hey, wait a minute. This isn't up to you to do this. And they sued.
Yeah.
And that's what led to all this. If that had never happened, I don't think we would be where we are today. But again, as I've said, there's no going back to it.
Yeah, because I think there's two notes on that. Hunter Woodhall is a prime example of kind of how the NCAA messed that up, because he was essentially forced to go pro because he had a hoodie company.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like Hunter Woodhall's hoodies. He was just a partner in it. And so he was making money, and they basically said, you can't do that.
And I guess next year he would be able to do it, but he didn't get in there in time.
Exactly.
It's just the whole thing that they do is just so whacked out.
Yeah.
This whole thing should be reorganized. The member institutions, Division I, whatever you call yourself, they should get together, do a real good planning, and say, we're going to reorganize under a new system, fire all those people at the NCAA in the off season, and just say, we're starting over and we're going to build this. Or maybe you build it while you're still letting the NCAA run things, and then when you get it all ready to go, you put it in place and tell those guys to get lost.
See, I'm not too worried about the cheating. It's the animosity that could possibly brew among athletes who say, oh, I'm QB number 2 and you get paid more than me.
You get paid a lot more.
So
I think there may be some creative things at a school like Arkansas, if they've got this division, that they can work on to help some of these lesser-known athletes get money.
Would think.
You won't make the money that maybe the quarterback or the running back will make, but you will get some. But I still say, if this worked the right way, you would take all of the money generated. Let's say in one academic year, the University of Arkansas generated $1 million from imaging and likenesses of athletes. You take that $1 million, you put it into a pot and divide it equally between all 420 scholarship athletes or whatever.
That's not a bad idea.
And I don't know what that would work out to, but it would probably more than double your current stipend.
Yeah.
And you're making more money than most kids at school that have part-time jobs for sure, and you're not having to do a part-time job. So to me, that's a better way to do that. Nobody gets mad because you're making this money and I'm making that money. The only other way to do that, to me, is to say, all right, you're allowed to make any amount of money you want, but you're not allowed to have that money until you get out of, you're no longer a student athlete. Then you could still claim amateur athletics because they couldn't have the money and spend it until their eligibility is up. I think that's a better way.
We could talk about this part all day. I find that whole thing very interesting.
We could.
All right, Peak Hog is ticked off, Mike. He says, I was under the impression that SEC schools could not show replays on the stadium video board while they're being reviewed. We get nothing at Baum-Walker Stadium, but they show them at Rocky Top. What do you say about that?
Well, clearly he went to the game.
I know.
We weren't there.
I wasn't there.
So I'm taking his word that they did that. You know, I called over to the U of A and they quoted me the rule. There's nothing to stop a school from showing a replay on the video board while it's under review. You can do that if you want. So why doesn't Arkansas do it? Well, the answer I got was they do it sometimes.
Yes, I was like, I think I've seen one or two.
But maybe. It's apparently up to the guy or the person
who's running the board.
I don't know if it's a man or male or female, but whoever's running that board is the one that decides whether they do it. And I guess they're content with that. I don't know. If they got a lot of complaints, maybe they'd start showing the whole thing. But they didn't.
So
there's nothing that Tennessee did that was wrong.
Yeah, and nothing's stopping Arkansas from doing it.
Right.
So Hoggle wants to know, what is motivating Hunter to play other in-state schools? Do you believe the potential damage, as Frank feared, to the idea that one team state is worth the risk?
You know, I don't think so far it's been a problem. Let's go back and look. I think it was 2 years ago that in baseball, Arkansas got beat by Arkansas Little Rock.
Yep.
And they beat the fool out of it. It was
yeah, it was not good.
And everybody went, uh-oh, this is why you don't play these teams. But then Arkansas went on to the College World Series that year, so it clearly didn't damage them, and it didn't damage their recruiting, because this year they're #1 in the country for as long as anybody's ever been #1. So that didn't damage them. Now this year in baseball, they played all of those teams. They played UCA, they played UAPB, they played Arkansas Little Rock, and they played Arkansas State, and they beat all of them in lopsided games. Yeah. So it hasn't hurt them this year. Now in basketball, they played Musselman his first year. They played Arkansas Little Rock, Darrell Walker's team, and Arkansas won that game. It's fairly close, but Arkansas won it. Tried to work out a game again with them this year, and they didn't play. It was this COVID thing, and they couldn't work it out. And then Eric Musselman reached out to Arkansas State and wanted to play them because of a COVID cancellation, and they didn't work it out with that either. So I'm not blaming Arkansas State, but I'm saying they weren't jumping at the idea of, we got to play you. So none of that seems to have caused any damage. But here's the thing, the biggie, the real biggie is still out there, and that is these two teams, Arkansas and Arkansas State, playing in football. That's the one Frank never wanted.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question that if Arkansas had played them over the last several years, Arkansas State probably beat them, maybe 2, 3, 4 years in a row if they played every year, because Arkansas's program has been down and Arkansas Little Rock has been up for several years. They're off a little bit from maybe their high point a few years ago, but they're still good. But this is 5 years away. And 5 years of Sam Pittman probably has me thinking they're going to be a different program than they are right now. So I don't think there's, looking ahead, I don't think there's a big issue there. But it's the long-term implications. For one thing, are you going to play them once and then 5 years later play them again? Then I don't think there's any issue there. If you start playing them every year, then maybe there gets to be a problem. And the problem I see, rather than them beating you, is that if you beat them 4 or 5 years in a row, you start looking like a bully, and people like to root for the underdogs. And there might be people sitting on the edge, they're not real Razorback fans, but they're not anything else. And they look at that and they go, well, I'm tired of Arkansas beating up on these guys. I'll be an Arkansas State fan. And that was what Frank worried about. He didn't want people to divide this thing. I'm this fan, I'm that fan. But he was also unrealistic in thinking that Razorback fans would be Arkansas State fans and Arkansas State fans would be Razorback fans, because generally they don't like each other.
Exactly, so, they're pretty.
I just think this is the 21st century, and that was an idea that was in there for a long time, and now it's time for it to change.
I like it. All right, J.M. Farrell says, Cole Kelly was just named the top player in the FCS football. What do you remember about him from his time in Arkansas, and are you surprised by this?
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised. What I remember is his redshirt freshman year. That was the last year under Bielema. And he didn't play hardly at all until the South Carolina game. And Jason, I think, and I were there at that game. And what I remember is that Austin Allen got hurt sometime in the second quarter. He got hit on his arm trying to throw, and his arm was hurt. And Bielema left him in there, and he clearly couldn't throw, and Arkansas got farther and farther behind. And finally, in the fourth quarter, when the game was completely out of hand, they went ahead and put Cole Kelly in there. I'm sure Bielema thought, well, what difference does it make now? And he led them to 2 touchdown drives and had like 150 yards or whatever in one quarter. You project that to a whole game, that would have been impressive. And he threw one nice 40-yard touchdown pass. So I thought, well, this guy's pretty good. The next 2 weeks, and Allen was hurt, so he didn't start for a while. Cole Kelly played Alabama, didn't play very well. Playing Alabama, played Auburn, and Auburn was really good defensively that year, and he didn't do very well against them. Then they played Ole Miss, and they won. Won by 1 point, and he had a good game, threw for 160 yards, 3 touchdowns, something. Hey,
that was a fun game.
This guy's not bad. Then came Coastal Carolina, and they got behind in that game, and then he came back and played well in the second half, and they came from behind and won that game. So he really had those victories, and they only won 4 games, I think, that year. So I think he was responsible for 2 of them. So
I don't think he or Ty Storey were nearly as bad as they were made out to look sometimes.
So what I was thinking after that 1 year, his redshirt freshman year, okay, he's probably got the job coming in. And he did start the first game, but very quickly Ty Storey got that job.
Yeah.
And Cole Kelly played a little bit, but then you got Connor Nolan into the mix and John Stephen Jones into the mix. And it was pretty obvious that he was going to leave.
Right.
I mean, he felt like, hey, they're ignoring me, I'm gone. So he goes to Southwest Louisiana. Okay, 2 years ago, this is really weird. They have a senior starter. He doesn't start a single game, but he plays in every game as a backup.
Yeah.
That's odd.
It is very odd.
Not sure I've ever heard of that. And he set a school record for passing completion, 72%. So he didn't he didn't start, but he played well. And then then he comes back this year and he throws for 2,600 yards, has 18 touchdowns, has, I don't know, I think he ran for like 7 touchdowns, scored 2 touchdown passes. He did everything. So the bottom line is he had an incredible comeback off of this, which should surprise no one because he's in the same category with Ty Storey and Nick Starkel. The lesson from this is don't play for Chad Morris if you're a quarterback.
Someone had to say it. All right. Lanny has our next question and says, Mike Neighbors has 3 5-star basketball players coming in this season. Has that ever happened in any sport at this school?
I don't think so. It might have happened in something like track. I don't know how.
I'm sure it happened.
I don't know how they do track recruits, but 3 in one class, and they're really mostly 4. But let's talk about Jersey Wolfenbarger, 6'5" combo guard out of Northside, and I mean she can do a lot of stuff. I mean, you've got this tall player now on the perimeter that can get the ball inside to your inside player, or she can go inside and score. She can rebound. She can run the floor. She really fits in with Mike Neighbors' system, but she's taller. Yeah. That makes a big difference. Okay, then you've got Miriam Dowda. She's that post player from Bentonville who signed with Baylor, but never played at Baylor because Kim Mulkey left, and so because her head coach left, she got out of that scholarship, and now she's coming in, and she's injured, but I haven't heard that she's not going to be available, and when you think of Wolfenbarger and her, a 6'6", 6'5" girl on the perimeter, a 6'4", or 6'5" post, you can see all kinds of possibilities. Lob it inside, score, penetrate inside, dish it off, get it back, back door. You've got a center that can rebound when you're missing those 3-pointers that we saw this year when they started missing 3-pointers. What happened? They were in trouble. Well, now you got somebody that can rebound and maybe score. So you got that. And then you got Sasha Goforth, who went to Oregon State for a year, and she's from Fayetteville High School, and she was an all Pac-12. She was on the Pac-12 all-freshman team, so had a good year. And she's transferring back here, and she's a 6'1" wing-type player that will be on one of those forward positions. So again, tall girl on the edge, tall girl out around the other edge, tall inside player. And then you got Yolanya Eaton from Nettleton, and I'm going to read what one recruiting service said about her because she had to sit. She came here last year and had to sit out with a knee injury. Athletic left-handed guard with offensive firepower, crafty off the bounce, passes with flair, interior passer that produces results, deep range threat with elusive dribble drive game, scores from deep, scores in traffic with a feathery touch.
A feathery touch.
Good. So you got 4 players. Top quality talent. I think people are about to get pretty excited about women's basketball. I'm excited.
Those are all really good, talented newcomers for Mike Neighbors. All right, Austin Hogfan asks, so is our basketball coaching staff better now than before? Will either stay around more than 1 year?
You know, I think these 2 guys prove that maybe this whole business of, Eric Musselman being so hard to work for that you have to get out after a year or 2 because both of them have worked with him before. Gus Argenal worked with him at Nevada, and he's clearly coming back here. And why would he come back and coach with a guy if he's impossible to work for? And this guy's been a head coach before. Keith Smart played for Musselman on the pro level not in the NBA, but on the pro level. And he coached on his staff at Golden State, so he's coached under him.
Yep.
He also himself has been an NBA head coach at 3 different schools. What he brings to the table is a guy that clearly, why is he coming here if Musselman's a jerk? Why would he come in here? He's a guy that also fits into this whole business of, we're going to go out and recruit players, and we're going to tell them, if you come here, we know how to get you to the NBA. Because this guy was in the NBA for years. And then the final piece of the puzzle is, here's a guy that won a national championship game under Bobby Knight with a shot right before the buzzer. That alone is going to help you in recruiting, because they're going to be looking at you like, whoa, man, what was that like? So the bottom line is, I think he did just fine in replacing the guys that left, maybe improved a little bit. Musselman recruits assistant coaches almost like the way some coaches recruit players. He just expects them to leave, and when they do, he's like, okay, I'll go get some more.
Well, could you imagine trying to keep up with Musselman? That's a lot.
Sure. But what I'm saying
he's always running around.
That's just the way he does things, and I think fans need to get used to it. And I got from the tone of the question, hey, this guy keeps running people off. I think they leave on their own. But until we see that it's hurting his program, I think he knows how to deal with it.
All right, we've got one more question for you, Mike. Arkansas Redneck says, some say that Jack Crow was among the worst head football coaches ever at Arkansas. To me, there's no way he was even close to as bad as John L. Smith and Chad Morris. What do you say?
First of all, if you want to talk about worst coach, you got to take John L. and put him in a separate category and say, yes, he was. He was only the interim head coach at Arkansas for 8 months. But he apparently, when Jeff Long hired him, thought he was being hired to be a comedian, not a head coach, because that's about all he did was crack jokes. So he goes over here as easily the worst.
Okay.
So now let's compare these two guys, Chad Morris, Jack Crow. To me, there is no comparison. Jack Crow won 9 games in 2 years, and Chad Morris won 4. But Crow was a little bit unfortunate. That second year, his team was on its way to winning the Southwest Conference Championship. They'd already beaten Texas, and Texas was the favorite. And it looked like they were going to run the table there at the end. And then in the Baylor game, Jason Allen, his quarterback, got his knee tore up on a dirty play, playing a dirty team, Baylor. And they didn't have an adequate replacement, and that team went downhill because they didn't have a quarterback anymore. They still made it to a bowl game. Chad Morris, the only way at Arkansas he was ever going to a bowl game is if he drove himself and bought a ticket. So there's no comparison between those two guys. Plus, I think Jack Crow was a better offensive coordinator. He had a longer track record. But both of them were similar in that they were good coordinators but didn't communicate very well with their players. The difference is, I don't think Arkansas's players liked Chad Morris. I think they liked Jack Crow. He just wasn't, he was partially the victim of bad luck, and partially he just, he didn't have Frank Broyles' ability to motivate.
You got to have that ability, Mike.
Sure.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Ask Mike. Always love all the questions submitted on hogville.net. We'll catch you back here next Monday.